Running away from financial problems, Mickey, Robert Patterson, and his friend Timu, Stephen Young, embark on a space colony. Registering as an expendable, Mickey finds himself dying at the ship's expense in order to accomplish the jobs given to him. Unfortunately, he becomes a multiple and is at risk of full termination. Mickey 17 is one of those movies that coming out of the theater, I had no idea what to make of it. I had no idea what I just watched, and I'm not entirely sure if I even liked it. Wanting to find some answers to the multiple burning questions I had, I read the book. Unfortunately, I came to the same conclusion. I had no idea what to think of it. You see, both the book and the movie have these intentional moments where I believed it was dealing with the theme. Unfortunately, they never went in depth with it. I don't even know if the theme was actually about colonization and or souls. Point is, whatever it may be, it doesn't really go much in depth with either, which is a shame because the concept and story sets it up nicely, but drops the ball in order to bring scenes of satire and sci fi instead of addressing the core theme that was supposed to be presented in both book and movie. Apart from that, the movie is ridiculed with character assassinations. Mickey 17 isn't sassy, but more of a wimp. Timo is rid of his morally gray character and instead just becomes a stereotypical bully cast aside for no reason. Marshall was diminished to being a caricature instead of an actual competent leader, etc., etc. And while I did like some scenes regarding Mickey 17 and 18, which differed from the book as Mickey 17 was more calm and collective instead of aggressive and punk rock Mickey 18 portrayed in the movie. Overall, these character assassinations were an odd choice that, quite frankly, I failed to see its purpose. Lastly, there are several scenes that were changed, altered, or omitted from the books that, again, I failed to see its vital importance to these changes, alterations, or omissions. I will get to these later on in my review, but for now, let's get on with this. And P.S. I will make comparisons between the book, but I'm going to try and focus on the story of the movie. A Nothing Burger. When I say this movie doesn't have a core theme, I mean it. And before you go typing away saying things like, it's about souls, oppression, how bad colonization is, or anything in between, I will still say it didn't do a good job implementing it, making it feel like a bunch of scenes with no real purpose. Things happen, sure, but the problem is that a lot of scenes don't deal with the theme, and those that do, don't do anything meaningful. Let's begin. The movie opens up in Niflheim, a cold, snowy, and desolate planet infested by creepers. Mickey 17 accidentally falls down a crevasse and is unable to get back up. With Timo's uselessness, he pronounces Mickey dead and heads back to the ship. Mickey was found by creepers, but instead of eating him, they help him get out of this crevasse. Returning back to the ship, Mickey finds out he's a multiple, where if caught, he'll undergo full termination. Being afraid of death, both Mickeys come to the conclusion to split their daily life in half. Okay, there was a huge chunk that was spliced in between, like Mickey's backstory on how he wound up in the situation as an expendable in the first place, and his relationship with Nasha that I will get back to shortly. The main thing I want to focus on is the story that was supposed to be presented, the one that made me want to watch the movie. That being how Mickey's life is turned upside down when he becomes a multiple. You think the story would revolve around that, right? Well, the book kind of did it, but poorly, because nothing really happens after he becomes a multiple, since Mickey 18 just slept for a good chunk of the book. The movie tried, but ended up focusing more on political viewpoints than the actual story or theme. And or it wasn't in Mickey's point of view. All in all, both the movie and book suffered from various things such as providing adequate stakes, character, and having scenes pertaining to the theme, which resulted in this movie being classified as a nothing burger, because nothing real happened. Things do happen, sure, but with no real purpose. There's some sort of structure, and one thing does lead to another, but with no real meaning. Scenes occur, but have little to no merit as it's just scenes to paint an image, rather than one that supports the theme, message, or concept of the movie. Let's talk about it. Stakes. Like I've said in previous reviews, stakes are part of what propels our story, keeps us on our feet, and adds weight onto characters' actions. Now, Mickey's life was in danger, so he got off the planet any way he could.
So we decided to get off of Earth. Nothing was working out, and so I applied to the colony expedition, but it seems like the whole of this rotten planet was running away from something. I guess everybody's got money problems.
Though I'd argue the movie made it seem more like he picked the job than it being the only job remaining, the beat remains the same. I did like how Darius Blank, Ian Hanmore, felt more like a threat in the movie, even though the associate part of the movie was confusing. I will say I prefer the book version better as it was Mickey's actions that brought him to an immense amount of debt instead of trusting his best friend into a failed macaron business. The book gives character and even motives to both the relationship between Mickey and Birdo and the reasonings behind leaving Midgard. And no, trusting Timo wasn't a good active choice because, in the end, it was Timo's choices that made the business go under. Mickey happens to be in the crosshairs. But once on the ship, a lot of actions that were taken don't result in any meaningful consequences, or at the very least, don't lead up to having any sort of consequences to provide adequate stakes that would hinder the protagonist, forcing him to act and ultimately overcome that flaw that needs fixing. For example, in the book, his rations kept getting reduced, forcing both Mickeys to come up with ways to solve the problem. Those actions did eventually result in them getting caught, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, that was the only thing that actually weighed Mickey because Marshall could not provide any other stakes through consequences given the circumstances. In the movie, however, I think there were two instances in which his rations were reduced. However, it didn't seem like this affected Mickey in any way, which was a major part of the book as everyone had certain credits to use to eat during a famine.
Food is everything.
Warning, Mickey 1. 7 calories over the current ration allocation.
On another note, there were two times Mickey felt or said that the cause of his pain is some sort of punishment for things he did. He first said this during the dinner scene, which I will get to as well. But in short, he said it because he didn't go to Nasha, Noemi Aki, which didn't make any sense. The second time was because he recalled the time he pushed the button that supposedly caused the accident that killed his mother. But that was only used for the ending, which held no weight because his trauma wasn't implemented into the story nor his character at all. If I remember correctly, Mickey did say he is being punished in the book. The good thing is that it had some merit to his words because part of the consequences had some weight. And unfortunately, the movie didn't try to implement this part of Mickey's character. Anyway, I think it all boils down to how Mickey was a very passive character, reacting to things instead of being an active character. Character assassinations. Practically every character was altered in one way or another from the book. Now, if you ask me, I would try to stick to the source material. Of course, sometimes changes are necessary, and sometimes those changes are better. However, I felt mostly every character change ruined not only these characters, but took away from the concept and theme/message the book was trying to convey. Mickey's sassy removal wouldn't have been that bad if the movie did something with his character. Instead, he was pushed aside for one reason or another, where he wound up feeling like a vessel to bring up those political viewpoints I keep mentioning. One instance I felt ruined Mickey's character was during his graduation into the expendable program when he had to pull the trigger to prove his faith in the system. Mickey pulls the trigger on this weapon that should have killed him, but being a test, he passed without dying, even though he hesitated and wasn't fully on board. However, in the movie, this was undermined because Mickey did not pull the trigger. Now, a change I did like was the difference between the two Mickeys, because it was interesting and done pretty well. Sort of. Mickey 7 was still a wimp and undermined in several scenes he was in. Marshall is another character that was drastically changed from the book. Backtracking the stakes a bit, once Mickey was off the planet and an expendable, the antagonist is Marshall, Mark Ruffalo. a natalist who dislikes the concept of multiples. Now, this setup was beautifully made, but was wasted in the movie to bring a worse concept. I do have to at least give credit to the movie. Despite Marshall's character, he provided more stakes and obstacles than the book. His demands, though childish and outlandish, actually had a bit of weight to them. The sad part is, much like Mickey's character, Marshall's character served no real purpose, other than, you guessed it. The worst part was how the movie treated Marshall at the end, and it's the ending I'm having trouble with. I like it, and I don't like it at the same time. I did like how both Mickeys were strapped with bombs and were at risk of being blown up, because it provides stakes. However, Act 3 was just a conversation and Nasha's character saving the day, while Mickey doesn't do anything. I did like how Mickey 18 sacrificed himself instead of just dying out of nowhere like in the book, but it felt more like Mickey 18 was the one who changed instead of Mickey 17. The point is, even if Marshall brought a bit of stakes, it lacked any sort of importance because the obstacles he provided related to the situation and sci fi world building or political viewpoints than one that conflicts with Mickey's character or relates to the theme, other than tyrannical reign and his actions hurting those of a different group. Marshall's whole idea of making a pure race, which can be seen as white supremacy, given all the things he said about the planet being white, asking Kai, Anna Maria Bartolome, apologies if I butchered that, to be one of many to repopulate the species, and how he talks down to lower class people and Mickey, doesn't really correlate to the whole concept of souls or colonization. To a degree. Nothing about it made Marshall seem like a threat or one whose actions invoke that of a natalist. Just an incompetent senator whose purpose is to provide a caricature of a dictator and nothing more. And while I'm at it, I did not understand his wife, Ilfa, Tawny Collette, and her fascination with sauces. I wanted to know the answer, but she was not in the books, leaving me with this curiosity as to her purpose in the movie. If you can answer that question, please let me know in the comments down below. So in the end, from the moment Mickey became a multiple, the plot drove the movie forward. Yes, even if the events make him not be afraid of death anymore, the way things happen wasn't meaningful. And if every character was changed to further emphasize the political viewpoints or something other than the actual theme or concept, then you're left with caricatures and character assassinations that add onto this nothing burger. Theme? Lastly, to bring it all together, a lot of scenes I talked about don't matter if nothing with these scenes correlate to the theme or concept of the movie. One of the biggest aspects I assumed the movie would have touched based on would be about souls and life. And even if it talked about it, it didn't add anything onto the story to really warrant the conversation or scene placement. It seemed insignificant overall. Mickey is constantly being asked about death and whether or not he's the same person as previous versions of him. Mickey 8 or 18 counters Mickey 7 or 17's idea, yet it never played around with the idea or notion, just briefly mentions it and continues providing scenes that quite honestly go nowhere. Theseus' ship, for example, is one aspect in the books that plays a big role with the theme, but sadly, it was just brought up for conversation and nothing more. And even if it wasn't, it didn't feel impactful because of the actions the characters made and how the story progressed. What I believed to be the theme resulted in just being mentioned to score some points, pointing it out through a political lens, of which most stemmed from additions not found in the book. There are two scenes I want to go over quickly, given the length of this review, that being the dinner scene and Nasha's breakup. One of the biggest letdowns of this movie was this dinner scene. In the scene, Marshall wanted to apologize for his irrational behavior towards Mickey after Jennifer died. Unfortunately, the focus shifted from Mickey to Kai, and instead of having a scene that can show character growth, we get a weird scene instead. Kai was asked to be one of several to help the colony repopulate the planet. Of course, Kai rejects the offer, and at the same time, Mickey rejects the lab grown meat. And while this event leads up to both Mickeys being caught, this dinner scene in particular doesn't have any true meaning towards the theme or message of the movie. just a jab at a political standpoint. And no, it isn't anything but that, because isn't their whole mission to colonize the planet? To continue the human population? So why is Marshall barely asking Kai this question? I'd assume people would have been chosen or applied for this role the same way Mickey applied to be an expendable before he got on the ship. The only explanation was for this scene to play out, which again takes away focus from the main story, pushes Mickey to the side, and only has Mickey react instead of act. Another aspect within the scene I found odd was when they prayed for Jennifer, and from prayer it turned into a song that didn't sit well with me. A similar thing can be seen in Nasha's outbreak. Nasha's character was honestly kind of weird. Though it is mentioned in the book, I personally did not like the amount of scenes relating to Mickey and Nasha's relationship. When Marshall was first introduced, it was intercut with a montage of Nasha and Mickey having intercourse. To be honest, it was extremely long, and it isn't the only time this happens. Apart from that being Nasha's personality, I feel she leaned more onto this political message the movie tried to portray. So her burst of anger towards Marshall is a visualization and representation of the masses yelling at the system's injustice.
No wonder you blew the elections, you moron.
But quite honestly, it was vulgar and unnecessary. You can have an outburst, but let it be more contingent with the theme and message. That way, it flows better and not seem odd. And yes, I am talking about the amount of cussing that was involved in her outbreak. In conclusion, if the concept is Mickey, despite being an expendable, is afraid of death, struggling with dying, or questioning whether he is the same Mickey or not in regard to souls, then the story should have brought up these issues or stuck to that. Have scenes that conflict with Mickey's mindset and make him come to the conclusion that leads to growth at the end. That would have been interesting. Instead, we get a wimpy passive character venturing through an interesting sci fi world, interacting and reacting to these butchered characters, while only being present to present scenes through a political lens. Because of that, the movie feels empty and lacking substance. So, to be honest, Mickey 17 is a perfect example of why you probably shouldn't include scenes through a political lens. But, anyways, those are just my thoughts. Did you enjoy the movie? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you on my next review. Until then, God bless.